So good afternoon everybody and welcome to this, which is a meeting of the Royal Statistical Society's Professional Statisticians Forum. I'm Andy Sutherland, formerly the Head of Profession for Statistics in the Health and Social Care Information Centre in the Government Statistical Service, and I'll be chairing this meeting. I'm also a member of the Royal Statistical Society's Professional Affairs Committee, which is the committee responsible for professional matters and, amongst other things, for the implementation of the CSTAT awards and revalidation processes. The Professional Statisticians Forum, if I just say a couple of words about that, it aims to provide a forum for professional statisticians to discuss aspects of their professional life, and it's intended to be different from the more technically focused fora of the RSS, the American Statistical Association and other statistical societies. PSF has its own web page, which is at www.rss.org.uk/PSF, where you can read about past and future events. We hold about 4 to 6 meetings each year, some face-to-face and some via telephone and web. We're actually presently on the lookout for new committee members. There's a small committee that organise the meetings, and if anybody's interested in that, the person to contact is Stephen Pike, who's stephen.d.pike@gsk.com, and we can probably put that somewhere on the relevant web page after the meeting. The presentation slides for today's meeting can be downloaded from the Professional Statisticians Forum web page, which, as I said, was www.rss.org.uk/PSF, either now or after the meeting. A link to the web access arrangements for today's meeting is posted at that page. Please note that the meeting will be recorded, so everything that's being said at the moment until the end of the meeting is recorded, so that we can post a podcast to that web page after the meeting. All participants are initially muted, and when we get to the discussion part of the meeting after the presentations, you can unmute yourself by dialing *6 to make your question. Wait till you hear you've been unmuted before asking your question, and then after making your contribution, please mute again by dialing *6. Alternatively, if you want to ask a question at any point, you can type your question using the Q&A interface at the top of the screen during or immediately after the presentation, and I'll do my best to then pick those up at various points in the discussion which will follow the presentations. And the final bit of domestics is that we would be really grateful if before leaving the meeting you could use the poll tab, which is at the top of the screen, to record your feedback. Your name and email address will be linked to your feedback, but the feedback is treated in confidence. So that's sort of like all the housekeeping stuff. Today's meeting is entitled Exploiting Administrative Data to Help Users of Official Statistics Developments. And we actually have 2 talks with 4 speakers. So the first talk will be given by Mary Gregory and Julian Prime from the Department of Energy and Climate Change. They'll be talking about DEC's National Energy Efficiency Framework. And the second talk will be given by Georgina Eaton and Tillie from the Ministry of Justice. They'll be talking about the Justice Data Lab. Both these topics, the DEC Energy Efficiency Data Framework and the MOJ Justice Data Lab, were prize winners, jointly awarded the RSS Official Statistics Award by the Royal Statistical Society and the UK Statistics Authority to recognise and celebrate developments in official statistics. So we thought it would be really interesting to hear about them. To give you a brief biography of the speakers, and then we'll get on with the talks. The first speakers will be Mary Gregory and Julian Prime. I think Mary is doing most of the talk. Mary was for 4 years at DEC, having been around in the civil service doing government statistics in various places for a number of years. However, she's now jumped ship and gone to work in DCMS, Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Julian has been 12 years in DEC, or as he reminds me that it wasn't always called DEC, but he's been in the same sort of area of work, and prior to that worked on crime at the Home Office. So the second set of speakers, Georgina has been 2 years at the MOJ, and prior to that was doing a Maths and Stats degree and Master of Maths degree. And Tillie has been 18 months at the MOJ, and prior to that was at Newcastle doing a Maths and Psychology degree. So that's a little bit about the speakers. The format of the meeting was I'll ask Mary and Julian to do their talk. There'll then be a very brief pause while they switch around their papers and themselves, and then Tillie and Georgina will give their talk, and then we'll have the discussion all in a chunk at the end for questions for either of the speakers or in common. That's been quite a longish introduction, and without further ado, if I could ask Mary and Julian to give their talk, which is about DEC's National Energy Efficiency Data Framework.
Excellent, thank you very much. So as Andy said, I'm going to talk about DEC's National Energy Efficiency Data Framework. If you can't hear clearly, then send us a message and we'll move some stuff around. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how it came about, a bit about what NEED is. So whenever I say NEED, I mean the National Energy Efficiency Data Framework, how NEED's been used, some developments and future plans, and then a little bit about challenges in terms of setting it up and how it's been used, and some lessons we've learnt, though I'm sure there are many more. So to start with, I think the history of, as has already been mentioned, not just DEC but previous incarnations of energy stats. The first publication of energy consumption data really was in 1948 in Jukes, and there's an ongoing high-level time series. But in 2003 it became very clear that we needed to do more at a disaggregated level and a greater focus on regional data. And so the precursor to NEED, and absolutely essential to being able to do NEED, was some work that Julian led on getting data, actually meter point data for gas and electricity, and enabling us to publish gas and electricity data all the way down to LSOA level now. And then following that, in 2009, the Eaton Energy Saving Strategy announced that DEC would produce a framework for linking data together, which became NEED. And in 2011 were the first pilot results from NEED. So as you can see, it was quite a slow process to get to the point where we've had data that we can actually analyse and get lots of value from. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I'll come on to at the end. So in 2012 we had our first official statistics released. In 2013 we did a lot of development, including the outputs available, the tools available. We reviewed the methodology and consulted on the proposals to publish an anonymised data set. And then in 2014 we published that anonymised data set, and the NEED statistics got assessed and were accredited as national statistics. So in terms of a little bit about what NEED actually is, it's a framework, as the title suggests, for matching together lots of different data sources. The four main data sources are outlined on the slide for those that can see that. The absolute core to it is that energy consumption data at meter point level. So we're able to have that at a household level, which means we can then match to other information about the household to do all kinds of analysis. So the other information we match it to includes energy efficiency measures. Up until now, it's always been historic up to the schemes that were introduced up to the end of 2012, looking at how much cavity wall and loft insulation, for example, were installed. We're about to add in information on the newer policies such as the Green Deal. We've also matched it with information about the properties, so things like the property age, the size of the property, the type of property, whether it's semi-detached, detached, etc. And then also some information on the household characteristics. So the household characteristics data we have is modelled, but it gives information about modelled income, tenure, and number of occupants. And linking up that all together provides us with the ability to do lots of useful analysis which gives new insights. So a couple of examples are on the chart, or on the slide. The top left just shows a relatively basic but still something we could never do before bar chart which shows the difference in typical consumption for different areas. So this looks at rural versus urban, and in the publications there are a lot more different types, so property type, property age, number of bedrooms. And the bottom right has been the biggest benefit to policy within the department. It looks at the savings from installing energy efficiency measures. So in this example it shows cavity wall insulation and loft insulation, and we've actually now got real evidence that shows households are saving for cavity wall insulation around 10% of annual consumption. We're on slide number 5 at the moment for anybody who's following on the slides. So the bottom right of that slide shows those savings. And for loft insulation it's around 2% a year. So they're significant savings for people who are considering saving loft insulation as a result of installation. And also it's been valuable to policy to understand what savings really are. Other ways it's been used is we've put together information which has then been used by the energy industry to create a tool which households can go and input information into and find out more about how their consumption compares with that of a typical similar property. So there's a web page which should have the link on the next one. I seem to have missed that out. But if you go to comparemyenergy.org.uk, you can input your information about your house, put in some stuff about it, how much energy you use, and then you can find out how that compares with a typical similar property. And if you've got higher consumption, then it will give you a few tips on how you might be able to reduce your consumption. So we're just on slide 8 now. So one of the other uses of the data has been this anonymised data set which I've mentioned, and the majority of the data used in that data set has come from the same sources as the core national statistics outputs. But because of availability of data and legal restrictions, there are some other sources. So we've made use of energy performance certificate data to give us the information about property attributes that we generally have been getting from the Valuation Office agency. The anonymised data set we consulted on in 2013 and it was published in 2014 and has been used by a number of researchers to be able to do their own research and analysis, making use of these valuable admin sources. There are lots of future plans, including for the anonymised data set. So on slide 9, there's a high-level summary. Some of the things that DEC's hoping to look at are understanding a bit more about uncertainty, and whilst we know lots about how we can do that in the survey data, we need to get a better understanding of the uncertainty in the admin sources, especially once you've combined so many of them together. Understanding more about the interaction of how the data we've had on digital insulation, loft insulation, feed-in tariff. We want to understand a bit more about how they're all interacting, including new data sources. So we've just recently included feed-in tariff data. We hope that we'll be able to add a flag for smart meter data in the near future. We want to do more to look at models of gas and electricity consumption. We've done some preliminary work, but this is a massive data source, so there's a lot more potential. Increasing the coverage of the data. So our analysis to date has covered England and Wales primarily, but we actually have most of the sources available for Scotland, and we're just trying to get that final source, which is the equivalent of the Valuation Office agency in Scotland. More on development of non-domestic need. So you've probably noticed most of what I've talked about to date is about households. We've done some work on non-domestic need, but it's a lot more complex, so there's a long way to go. And then also to enable wider access to the data. So we've published that anonymised data set last year, and we now want to look at how we can develop that and what more we can do. and users have suggested the most beneficial thing for many of them would be to put some data in some kind of secure data lab so that they can get access to more detailed data that's not necessarily fully anonymised. So on slide 10, I've set out a few of the challenges that we came across when we were working on need, and I think the biggest one was the legal restrictions and access to data. So it's hard enough getting access to one data source, but to then try and get access to numerous data sources and make sure you understand how you're allowed to use each one and don't do anything that's against any of the data sharing agreements or legal things has been quite time consuming. The flexibility, as with all admin data sources, there's not as much flexibility as one might like, but if you use it properly, then there are still lots of things that can be done. And the timeliness, again, we're reliant on the data sources, so they can't provide them any quicker, and therefore there's always inevitably a delay in when we can get the results out. Missing data and quality of data or coverage of data have also been challenges along the way, and things that we still need to understand a bit better in terms of the uncertainty. Quality of matching the records. So we're matching everything together at a household level. In most cases, we're getting match rates that are in the 90s, but there are going to be some types of properties which are not as good matches. So for us, we know that non-domestic properties don't match as well, and that flats don't tend to match as well, especially in Scotland. So there's lots more that can be done there. And IT infrastructure, which is probably more a problem for government, but can be a problem for many people because these are massive data sets we're working with, and it's very easy to find we don't have the infrastructure to hold them and do what we want with them. So on slide 11, I've outlined a few of the lessons that we've learned from the process. I'm sure there are many more, but given that legal issues were one of the biggest things, one of the biggest lessons was to make sure that you allow the time to get all those elements in place and don't expect to be able to produce something like this overnight. It often might mean that, for example, we had to make changes to legislation for one of the data sources, and that's not something that can be done quickly. And things like planning ahead to ensure required permissions are in data sources. So, for example, with the feed-in tariff data, we got in early enough to be able to add something to the conditions when people were signing up to the feed-in tariff so that we could make sure we were allowed to use their data, and similar in surveys, adding questions, but that all takes time to filter through the process before you can make use of the data. I think one of the things we found is that the admin data may not replace some of the other sources, and for DEC that's quite a lot of technical trials and surveys, but it really does complement other data sources, and so make the most of how that can happen. And also it can help direct more expensive research. So we've been able to identify areas where we didn't know as much as we'd hoped, and we've therefore used need to direct some work more specifically rather than having to work out everything from scratch. I think it's also been a valuable lesson that probably most people know already anyway, but the way you present and disseminate the data has a massive impact on how engaged people are and whether it has an impact on policy. And we found that that tool that industry produced based on the need data has had a massive impact on engaging people with energy issues and with the data that's available. Another big lesson has been learning from others. So even if nobody's doing something that appears similar, a lot of the issues have actually been addressed through other projects, even if not all in combination at the same time. And then the other big thing, again, really relates to time, but setting up access, matching and cleaning the data has taken a lot more time than actually doing the analysis. So once you've got all the data set up, the analysis actually seems relatively easy. So that's a very brief run-through of need. There's contact information on slide 12, including the web page and an email address for any further questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. We're just going to have about 2 minutes here while we swap the the speakers are actually sat in different parts of the room, and we're just going to swap them over now, and then we'll start with the second presentation. And then at the end of that presentation, we'll take any questions. But do feel free to type your questions into the relevant part of the online system. Okay, so as I said at the start, our next speakers are from the Ministry of Justice, Georgina, Eaton and Tillie, who are going to tell us a little bit about the Justice Data Lab. So, Georgina and Tillie.
Thank you. As Andy said, my name is Tillie. I'm with my colleague Georgina Eaton here today, and we're going to be talking about the Justice Data Lab service that is a service at the Ministry of Justice. We're going to talk about the work that led to us jointly winning the Excellence in Official Statistics Award last year. So what we're going to be covering today is a bit about the history of the Justice Data Lab service and why it was set up, how the service actually works, a few of the key findings that we found over the past couple of years, and then end with some developments that we've brought in over the past couple of years, developments for the future, and some of the lessons that we've learned as well. So I'm now on to slide 3. So why did we set up the Justice Data Lab? Well, the Data Lab was set up in April 2013, initially the one-year pilot, and it was to improve the evidence base on successful rehabilitation by giving organisations that work with offenders, by giving them different kinds of interventions from employment, mentoring, to give them secure and legal access to aggregate reoffending data. And this was to enable them to better assess the impact of the work that they do and the effectiveness of the interventions that they carry out. Now on to slide 4. So it was identified a couple of years ago that lots of charities in particular found it extremely difficult to access reoffending data, and when they did, it was a very long and time-consuming process. This was meaning that a lot of organisations weren't able to understand how effective the work that they carry out is, and also understand ways in which the work that they do could be improved, as well as this evidencing to funders why they should fund their interventions is obviously extremely important, but without access to this data, it's sort of impossible to do. It also became clear that it wasn't just charity issues. There's lots of organisations in the public and private sector that do as well. So moving on to slide 5, and there's just a project timeline here. So it shows kind of the very start of our service to where we're at today. And to briefly go through this, it was at sorry about that. So it was at the very end of 2011 that MPC, which are New Philanthropy Capital, they're a think tank organisation that works to support the evaluation in the voluntary and community sector. They actually approached the Ministry of Justice explaining the difficulties that lots of charities have in accessing reoffending data, and asked if there was some sort of service that we could maybe set up in response to this. So throughout 2012, there were a number of roundtable events with people, with academics, people from the voluntary sector, the private sector and public sector. There was lots of discussions as to what the service could look like and various ideas. One of these included having a sort of secure room where people who work at these organisations could come in, access the reoffending data and do some of their own analysis. However, it was decided that the service as it is today was the most appropriate and effective use of the administrative data that MOJ hold. And Georgina will talk to you about that in a minute, about how the service actually looks. So April 2013, the pilot went live, and a year later, the pilot was extended for another year, and we committed to making various improvements in the past year. And where we're at today is that from next month, we will become a permanent service at the Ministry of Justice. So I'll now just hand over to Georgina to talk to you about how the service actually works.
So we move on now to slide number 6. So how the Justice Data Lab actually works. So organisations working with offenders who give them an intervention, so it could be, for example, helping them find employment or helping them find somewhere to live. And they send in data to us through our data upload template, which is basically an Excel spreadsheet which contains columns of different variables that we need. So these are things like forename, surname of the offenders, gender, date of birth, and a date that they started working with them. We ask them to send in a minimum of 60 individuals, but they can send in as many as they can. In fact, that's what we recommend, obviously, for our analysis. They do this by sending it through a secure email address, and then we sort of confirm at the end that this has been sent securely. Also on the upload template, they have to provide information about the organisation and the intervention, so things like what the organisation actually does, what type of intervention it is, and at what point they start working with them, so whether it's in the community or whilst they're on a custodial sentence. The next sort of main stage is for us to do the matching and analysis. So I'll sort of briefly sort of talk you through what we do there. So first of all, we match the individuals to the Police National Computer, which is a database of all recordable crimes in England and Wales. And after we've done that, we match to Ministry of Justice administrative data sets, which also includes some variables from the DWP HMRC data share that we have with those departments at the Ministry of Justice. And we match to these data sets to identify the demographics of the people that the organisation work with, such as gender, ethnicity, age, nationality, and the criminal histories as well. So things like the type of offence or sentence that they were serving when the intervention took place and the number of previous offences. And we then also identify reoffending follow-up period, as that's the main thing that we want to look at in our analysis. We then create a match control group of similar offenders who have not had the intervention from the administrative data sets, and we do this based on the characteristics of the group that the organisation work with, that I'm going to call the treatment group from now on. We then use logistic regression models to calculate propensity scores and then conduct propensity score matching to match individuals from the treatment group to the control group. So we're creating two matched groups. We then do some statistical significance testing to determine whether there's a true difference between the reoffending outcomes for the treatment group and the control group. And we give all these results back to the organisations through a standardised report, and it's aggregate data as well. We don't give back any individual level data. And after we've done that, the organisations have 4 weeks to come back with comments on the report, make sure that everything that we have in there is correct and they're happy with it. And we publish the findings in our official statistics publication, which is published monthly. So if we move on to slide number 7. So this is just covering what's actually provided to our users in the reports. So we provide a variety of reoffending measures. So we have the 1-year reoffending rate, which is whether someone has reoffended or not within what we call our 1-year follow-up period, which is taken from the start date of a community sentence or release from prison. We then have the frequency of reoffending, so how many offences have been committed in that follow-up period, and the time to reoffending, and this is a description of how many days until the first reoffence for the two groups. So for each of those measures, we do the statistical significance testing and say whether there's a statistical significance difference between the two groups. We then also publish information on the characteristics of both the treatment and control groups. So these are mainly the variables used in the modelling, so demographics. And we also try to display the results through commentary as well as graphical displays as well. So on the slide you should see a graph, and that's an example from one of our reports that we've published, which shows the reoffending rate for one of the organisations that we worked with, and the match control group, and the confidence intervals around that. And we have to try and express the results in a simple way so non-statistical audiences can understand the results, as a lot of the organisations that we work with have very, very little statistical knowledge. So, just a sort of quick overview of what we've published so far. So far we've published 123 reports. These 123 don't represent the number of organisations that have accessed our service. Some of the reports have been broken down into different programme types, so doesn't represent all of the organisations. But so far we've had 28 reports that have indicated statistically significant reductions in reoffending on the 1-year proven reoffending rate. 88 have been inconclusive, but however 11 of those have shown statistically significant reductions in the frequency of reoffending. And finally 7 have indicated a statistically significant increase in reoffending on the 1-year proven reoffending rate. Moving on to slide 9. This is a graph which shows the results that we've published to date by intervention type. So we're building up an evidence base of what works for the rehabilitation of offenders, and this is sort of starting to show that. So we've had requests from a variety of organisations, from different types of interventions, all the way through from relationship building, mentoring, employment, education and accommodation, just to mention a few. And we've had some unusual ones as well, such as an organisation providing yoga and meditation materials to offenders in prison. The largest number of requests that we've had come from employment interventions, but proportionally education and learning have the most statistically significant decreases in reoffending. As you might be able to see from the graph, employment and accommodation both have a mixed bag of results between statistically significant decreases, statistically significant increases and inconclusive results. And then moving on to slide 10, this is a chart showing our results by sector type. So as Tillie mentioned earlier, the service was initially in mind for the voluntary and community sector, but this chart actually shows that everyone's in the same boat and there's demand for reoffending data from all the sectors. So we've had people access it from the private, public sectors, voluntary and community sector, as well as educational institutions. The majority of our requests have come from public sector and the voluntary and community sector, but the largest number of significant decreases have come from the voluntary and community sector. And I'm going to pass you on to Tillie.
Okay, so now I'm just going to go through some of the developments that we've made to the service over the past year or so. I should mention that after the first year of the pilot finished, we published a reflections document that looked back on the year of the pilot, and we sort of, in that document, committed to making various improvements. A lot of these were based on feedback that we'd had, internal feedback, feedback from our expert panel, and also, well, mainly feedback from our users, which we get in the form of a survey that we send out. Once we've published an organisation's request, we'll send them a survey to fill out and give us feedback from. So, based on this feedback, we brought in several developments, one of which was providing greater detail on the matching process within the reports, and this is because within our matching process there can often be quite a lot of attrition, and we wanted to explain more clearly to our users where that attrition was falling. Another development we brought in is looking at regional data and prison establishments data. So what I mean by this is if a intervention has just happened in one prison, we will try and find a match control group of people that have also just been in that prison. This is obviously improving on our matching and getting a match control group that is a lot more similar to the treatment group than just a national control group. However, there are some dangers with this, as it can often lead to some quite poor matching, and therefore the national control group is more appropriate to use for the results. We also now break down, we all give reoffending outcomes by different demographic profiles. What I mean by this is an intervention may be carried out, but there may be different types of that intervention or different types of courses, and so if numbers permit, we will do various analysis on the different course types so that an organisation can see exactly which aspect of their intervention is the most effective. Another development that we brought in is looking at statistical power. So for all those analyses that are inconclusive, what we will do is provide an assessment of the statistical power, explaining to the organisation how many people they would have needed in their control group to get a statistically significant result. And as Georgina mentioned earlier, we do have 3 reoffending measures that we report on. Initially, we just had the 1-year reoffending rate, and over the past couple of years, we brought in frequency and time to reoffending. Moving on to slide 12, a few more developments that we brought in the past year. One of these has been improving the upload template that Georgina mentioned earlier. We found that at the beginning of setting up the service, we often weren't getting enough information from organisations about what they do, about where the intervention takes place, for example. And we've sort of improved our upload template to ask these questions a bit more up front, anticipate what we're going to need to know further down the line. So this is obviously saving time and making best use of that upload template at the beginning. And one piece of feedback that we did have at the beginning of our service was that our customer service could be variable. We obviously wanted to improve on this, and we now communicate with our customers on a much more regular basis, have sort of standard points throughout a request that we will contact the customer and explain where we're at and how the analysis is looking so far. And another development, we have been keeping our underlying data more up to date. What I mean by this is originally we were updating our reoffending data on an annual basis, but we now do it on a quarterly basis so that we can keep demand for the service up and more recently established organisations can access our service. In general, I would say we've made the processing of our requests a lot more efficient over the past couple of years. This has been done in various ways, but just generally making the methodology a lot faster, meaning that we now have a lot quicker turnaround time for requests than we did when we first started. And finally, improving our official statistics publications. One way we've done this is that we now publish a summary Excel file where we will give a summary of all the reports we've done so far, but break them down by intervention type. So this is sort of the evidence base that we're trying to build in terms of what does work for rehabilitation of offenders. And this is now published every month, so it's a sort of easy way for someone to go to look at all our results in one place.
So moving on to slide number 13, I'm just going to talk to you about some developments that are currently in progress. So Tillie mentioned that we've, throughout the time that Data Lab has been running, we've increased the number of reoffending outcomes that we report on. So we're now looking at some more, such as the severity of reoffending, which is something that's, that organisations that have accessed our service have fed back to us that would be interesting for them to know more about. So we're currently looking into that. Also as well, enhancing the understanding of criminogenic needs of the individuals. So looking at what kind of needs the offenders have, such as whether they have drug needs, alcohol needs, or whether they have accommodation needs, for example, and being able to We intend to do this through the use of offender assessment data, which is another administrative data source that's available to the Ministry of Justice. Also as well, looking and understanding more about the individuals that are not matched in an analysis. So we're trying to sort of give some information about looking at the characteristics of the unmatched individuals to see if there's anything similar about those, and any further information that we can get from other data sources as well at the Ministry of Justice to suggest why the individuals haven't matched. We're also looking at doing an official statistics publication review of our statistics, so to make sure that we're still communicating our findings in the best way that we can for our users in particular, and also looking to becoming a national statistics publication and the steps that we may need to take to get to that stage. And additionally doing a review of our feedback survey that we send to the organisations once we've sent them their report as well, to sort of make sure that, again, we're still asking the right questions that we need to continue with the service and help with the development. And finally, another thing we've been working on is supporting other government departments on potential data labs. So providing advice on how we've implemented our service and the methodology that we've used. And what's been really great is that New South Wales government in Australia had heard about the Justice Data Lab, and they wanted some advice of setting something similar up over there, and they currently submitted a business case, so that's really exciting as well that we've been involved with that. And finally, just going to sort of finish up with some lessons learned. So these are lessons learned that we can pass on to other government departments, anyone working with the voluntary and community sector as well, or setting up a service or a project from scratch. So one of the important things that we found is that to have internal and external support. So we've had ministerial and policy support in setting up the data lab, as well as support from the think tank organisation MPC, and they've also helped us promote the service and also helped with thinking about what developments can be made and to help the continuation of the service. The Another one is the availability and quality of the internal and external data. This can be quite a challenge. So some organisations don't collect anything on individuals they work with, or have very limited information, or as in sort of newly established organisations, they have a lack of data, so they've only been working within a few individuals in small groups. So this has sort of been a barrier for organisations actually accessing our service. So we've been trying to provide advice to these organisations on what to do. But also making sure that we understand the quality of all the administrative data sources that we use, if they're all linked together, and also as well the availability in the reoffending data, so when the latest data will be available, making sure that we sort of keep it up to date, as there's a time lag with reoffending data. Another lesson that we've learned is that complications can easily arise when doing the analysis. It's generally not smooth and is different for every single request. So sometimes we end up doing several iterations of the propensity score analysis and to ensure that the quality is good enough. So we've had to do a lot of sharing of solutions within the team and sort of discussions on how we've overcome certain issues. And we've also had to ensure that we've had good communication with organisations to make sure that we obtain enough information to be able to carry out the analysis in the best way possible. Also, another lesson that we've learned is communicating statistical techniques and results to non-statisticians, which has been quite challenging, but I think in the end we've sort of got there with it, and it's really sort of making sure that we take the time to ensure that organisations really understand their results and feel confident about them being published and what is being published. And finally, sort of leading into the next point, explaining transparency to customers. So being upfront with them and telling them that yes, their results will be published regardless of what the results will be, and also making sure they understand the rules for purposes of official statistics, and making sure that even though we have to send the report to them 4 weeks in advance of it being published, making sure that they don't share results with anyone in the public domain. And I'll pass you on to Tillie, who's going to share some lessons learned herself.
So as we were a brand new service just a couple of years ago, it was difficult to know how the service would be taken, who would actually use it. So encouraging feedback has really been crucial for us. A lot of people don't give feedback too willingly, so the surveys help with that, but sometimes we've had to prompt people. But it's extremely important for us to know how to take the service forward. So that is something we'll continue to do. Another lesson that we've learned is that continual development is necessary. I suppose that's quite obvious. There's always improvement to be made. There's always ways in which people want the service to sort of evolve, and so making sure we take the time to do this alongside our usual work is extremely important. That sort of leads on to the next point about time and resource. In terms of time to carry out a request, it can differ from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. And we don't always know at the start of an analysis how long it's going to take, so it's just trying to be upfront with the customer about how long it will take and keep them updated with time and progress. In terms of resource, IT resource has been our main issue really. Being able to have access to the appropriate programs, even just Excel to be big enough to take the data that we're working with. We've had difficulties with that at times, so that's been something that we often have to think ahead about. But finally, I think the most important lesson that we've learned is just the importance of promoting the service and engaging with our users. As a team, we've done a lot of networking, a lot of presenting about our service, going to various events, The think tank organisation, MPC, have been great at helping us promote our service and just kind of building up a contact list of people who have used our service or would potentially like to and be helpful for them. So just keeping up with them and keeping engaged with them and letting them know the improvements that we've been making along the way. So that's a sort of the Justice Data Lab in a nutshell, I suppose. Hopefully you found it useful to find out about what our service does, how it works, and what we've learned over the past couple of years. On the final side, there are some contact details there. So we've got our email address if anyone wants to get in touch just to ask us any more questions or find out more about the service. And we've also got some links to our publications. So the top one is where an organisation would go if they were planning to use our service, and the one on the bottom gives all our reports that we published to date and a summary of those as well in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our speakers, both Tillie and Georgina, and Mary and Julian. Those have been very interesting talks, and you've obviously made good progress in some quite challenging areas. As I mentioned, there are two ways of asking questions for people who are listening in or following us on web. One is to use the Q&A button on the web page, and that'll throw up a question which I can then read out for the benefit of people who are listening in. And the other of which is to mute yourself by pressing *6 on your telephone and give your name and say you'd like to ask a question, and I'll then invite you to ask your question or referee between competing people and put them in order. So just while you're thinking about that, if I could just ask a sort of first question, which is, I mean, to some extent you have covered this, but I'm interested to know, because the GSS generally has sort of wagon loads of data stored in various places, and these seem to be some very good examples of managing to exploit that in a way which is consistent with the law but brings great benefits. And I just wondered what you felt was the most important factor in take those things forward, and what's the thing that's made a difference to what you've tried to do that maybe other government departments or other organisations might want to think about if they're trying to get some progress in this area. Anyone wants to take that? Julian, yeah.
I think for the energy data, it's been building up the relationships with our data providers. So making sure that the energy companies who are our key data providers were taken with us for the entire journey, so that they knew exactly what we were going to be doing with their data, how we were going to be using it, matching it with the other data sources, and for the levels that we would be making data available to end users. So to start with, when they initially provided us with the data, they were rather sceptical on how we would handle it. So we had to build up their trust. We were initially only able to publish data at local authority level, but after a couple of years, when they realised exactly how we were going to be handling their data, they then gave us permissions to publish data at a more disaggregated level. So we then went to the two statistical geographies of the lower super output area and the middle super output area. And actually tomorrow we're going to be publishing some data at postcode level, which was actually something that our users wanted 10 years ago when we first started with this work. So we're finally getting there.
It's been a journey.
Well, I think to add, even a year ago, it's actually the data suppliers who now wanted at that level. So we haven't just got the users who were originally requesting it, but now the data suppliers are so confident they're also requesting it.
Well, I guess we're quite lucky because in terms of the data, the teams that sort of produce the data and manipulate it are kind of sat side by side with us. but I suppose it's a case of working with those teams to fully understand the data and how we can interpret different variables, different results. So we have worked closely with a lot of people in different teams in the Ministry of Justice to help us get to where we are, or the point at which we're at now, and the developments that are in place at the moment.
Yeah, because we actually have sort of a specified, they call it data linking team, which actually link a lot of the data sources that we have at the Ministry of Justice, and also sort of in charge of sort of sorting out the data shares between other government departments as well, where we've got those data shares. So it's just sort of talking to them to understand what we can access and what we can't access, and again, like Tillie said, just sort of identifying what variables that we can use and the quality of those variables.
Thank you. Does anyone in the audience have a question they would like to ask? Please feel free to unmute your phone and ask if you wish.
I have a question.
Yes, go on then. We can have speakers asking each other questions. That's good.
When you were talking, you were saying about, in terms of matching, there's some places that didn't match so well, and you mentioned flats and domesticated kind of buildings. Is there a way you made up for that in the analysis, or?
So, to put it bluntly, initially there are two ways we made up for it. We didn't include them in the analysis. So, our original analysis, we excluded flats and we excluded non-domestic buildings. We've done a lot more on the non-domestic front now and looked at all sorts of ways of trying to weight the data or calibrate the data. So we know what the national total for non-domestic energy consumption should be. So there's a lot of work being done to try and work out the difference between the sample that we've matched and that calibration, and that's kind of, I'd say it's still experimental statistics. Oh, that's coming out tomorrow as well. There should be a lot more information on how we're progressing with that tomorrow. Mm-hmm.
Just give the audience a minute to see if anyone wishes to speak. No? I have a question actually for the Justice team, which was, I was interested actually, I think it's very interesting how you've managed to get sort of research value out of what you're doing by getting people to feed in their interventions and looking at them. I'm interested in how you achieve quality and confidence in the methodology, because if I was somebody doing some sort of community intervention with these people and saying that it worked or didn't work, I give you my data and it feels a bit sort of black boxish in a way, particularly around the propensity matching. So I would be a bit embarrassed if subsequently I got my results back and it showed that I was doing great and I put this about, and then some academic somewhere else sort of took a pot shot at the propensity matching and said this wasn't the right way to do it or something. So I'm just interested in how you build the confidence in the methods that you've got in your system, and I can see why you have to use that system, because you can't give people the data to do it themselves.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, propensity score matching is something that's been used at the Ministry of Justice quite frequently, so it's something that's been around. It was actually recommended as part of our service. We've got sort of a methodology team as such in our statistics unit at the Ministry of Justice, and they sort of recommended this sort of methodology, and I think it's just a thing with sort of we're going to do as part of our review of our publication. We're going to sort of review the methodology as well, and making sure that what we're doing is still the right methodology, basically.
I suppose we do have on our website an actual methodology paper, so if anyone did want to use it and find out exactly how things are done, they could do. as we said, a lot of the users and the organisations don't come from a statistical background. So I guess it's about just putting their confidence in our service in general, probably more than the actual methodology, because that is something that they might not understand as much. And I think there are difficulties with that, and I think there may have been quite a few organisations who may refrain from using the service because of that, but it is one of the only ways for them to actually show how they're doing. So it's, I suppose, the best of what you can do.
Yeah. Something is better than nothing.
Yeah. Agree with that. We had a question from a member of the audience, from David Sayer. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. It says, it's addressed to both of you, or to all of you really. What software was used in merging or matching the data from the various sources? I don't know if the DEC team might like to take that one first, and then pass back to the Justice. So it's about the software that was used for the matching and merging.
Yeah, so we've generally used SAS for all of our matching. Initially, we did the address matching by an external organisation, and they used their own software that they'd produced specifically for address matching, but we now do all of that internally using SAS.
And is it easy? Does it work properly, do you think?
Some of my colleagues may say that SAS is the best program for address matching, but it certainly is good for the analysis once you've done the address matching. And it can cope with the big data sets without any problem.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much. I might pass you on to the Justice. I can say something about what they do.
So we use SQL or SQL, some people like to call it, to match. So that's matching to the police national computer, as well as matching to our administrative data sets, which are all loaded into SQL. But we actually do the analysis in R to do the statistical stuff that we need to do.
Thank you. Any other audience questions? Anybody like to try the unmute function? So I had another one actually, which was really about for the energy people. Actually, I was interested that you used Experian data. I think we had a look at this some time ago actually, and that's a bit black boxy as well in many respects. And I just wondered how because a lot of it originates from different bits of government anyway, and they process it, I think. But I just wondered what you felt was the particular value that added to your system that wasn't available from other sources.
Yeah, so the main reason we went for Experian was because they can do model data at a property level. To put in context, our Experian data isn't officially part of the National Statistics outputs, even though it's in the same publication. We don't believe it's the same quality as the real data that we use from all the other sources. And we don't use it in the kind of matching where we look at the savings from energy efficiency measures. So similar to the propensity score matching, we do a comparator group and a treatment group, and we don't use the Experian data when we're creating those groups. But there was no other source of data available at the property level to look at things like income and tenure, which for DEC are really important for fuel poverty policy, as well as lots of other things. So we took the best that was available. We have looked at modelling it ourselves in-house to see if we could do a better job, but we haven't been able to do a job that has better accuracy. Yet, at least.
Yeah. So I suppose another question from me, and then, I mean, if there aren't any other questions from the audience, we may end up wrapping it up. So if you do want to ask something, you better get your questions in. Was really around the extent to which this is funded at the moment by your various departments, and the extent to which it might move to being a charged service if it's not already, and how it became sustainable if the demand went up. So So just something about the charging basis or not, or funding.
So the service is a free service for organisations to use. I did mention earlier that we're becoming a permanent service in MOJ from next month, and to our knowledge it wouldn't become a chargeable service. It's not really something that's been talked about or mentioned, so I guess it will carry on as is. In terms of sustainability, I guess it will come with the demand for the service. If that increases largely, we will need to expand the team. But at the moment, it's quite comfortable with the amount of demand we have and the resource that we have. So for the moment, it will be staying.
Yeah, good.
So I guess what we've done works in a slightly different way, in that a lot of it is supporting policy within the department as well as the national statistics output. I guess one of the big things was the first couple of years were a lot more expensive than the now costs, and part of the reason we brought that address matching in-house is to reduce costs. So between the first kind of 18 months, including the pilot, and now the costs are probably about a third of what they were. So that's made it a lot more sustainable, and I think the evidence it provides speaks for itself really within the department.
Have we got any more questions on the list? No?
Hi, sorry, Megan Towers. It took me a while to work out how to unmute the phone. Sorry about that. I think Mary and Julian were talking about their presentation and dissemination when their lessons learnt was how to improve that, to engage users and have a policy impact. So I was just wondering what did they do before, what do they do after, and so therefore what were the improvements that they made?
So I think there wasn't one specific thing. I think it was just a general lesson that where we had made an effort to do something on the dissemination and visualisation, that had really had a bigger impact than where we might have just put out some tables as part of a report. So that work we did with industry to get them to create that website, a lot more people have used that website than the people who know that actually DEC as a department produced this data source. So they might not even know where that data's come from, but they are actually engaging with the outputs and hopefully saving some energy as a result.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any final questions that anyone would like to ask? I'll just give you a couple of seconds just to wrestle with the unmuting button or anything else. Any further points that anyone here wanted to ask? No? Okay, so it remains to thank you very much for your participation in the meeting and also for the talks that have been given. I think these are I can see why these have come out as being really exciting and won the prize as they did. And I wish you all the best with the future of these pieces of work, which look to have great promise. Can I remind audience members that we would be grateful if you could use the poll tab at the top of the screen to record your feedback on today's session, and to remind you that your name and email address will be linked to your feedback, but it will be treated in confidence. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating in today's event. The next meeting of the PSF, the Professional Statisticians Forum, will be held on the 20th of April, and that's another virtual web telephone meeting, which is at 2 o'clock on the 20th of April, and is about the role of statisticians in research ethics committees. And that's the speaker there is Chris Foy, from Gloucestershire Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust, who is chair of the Oxford B Research Ethics Committee, and John Kirkpatrick, who is a member of the Cambridge South Research Ethics Committee and is also based at PPD. So that meeting is on the 20th of April, if people are interested. And now, again, finally, to draw your attention to the web page where the talks will be, and the podcast will be put, and where details of future meetings will be put. And also, if anybody's interested in joining the committee, there'll be a contact there. And that's www.rss.org.uk/PSF. Thank you very much to Tillie, Georgina, Mary and Julian for their talks, and to you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and that is then the end of the meeting. Thank you.